Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going deep, really deep into the Quran.
Specifically, the beginning, the opening verses of Surah Al-Baqarah.
Yeah. And we should say up front, this is more than just looking at, religious verses. This is about uncovering some really profound insights and guidance, and hopefully something that has, a really unique significance for you, the listener.
Absolutely. We're going to be looking at these initial verses and really trying to understand what sets the Quran apart,
Yeah.
what kind of impact it's intended to have on us, and some of the ways, really remarkable ways, that its importance is actually expressed.
Okay, so let's jump right in. Let's start with something that's super fundamental, just the power and value of language itself.
Right.
A lot of times it's presented as not just a way for us to, communicate, but as an honor, given to humanity.
Absolutely.
It allows us to share our deepest thoughts and feelings. And it's absolutely essential for how we pass down our cultures and knowledge, through generations.
I mean, one of the things that's really fascinating here is that, language goes beyond just the spoken word.
Right.
Think about the fact that writing and reading has allowed knowledge to endure, to survive across these huge stretches of time and space. Think about someone like Imam al-Qurtubi.
Yeah.
His understanding of the Quran from centuries ago is accessible to us now because it was recorded, it was written down.
Right.
And then translation comes along and it acts like a bridge. It allows these insights to travel across languages, across cultures.
And this is where things get really interesting. The Quran, it's not just sort of placed alongside other influential books. It's described as having this unique grace, almost as a reflection of the grace that Allah bestows upon his creation.
Right.
It's seen as the bedrock of happiness.
Yes.
Our fundamental approach to life, a constitution to live by, this unbreakable connection to Allah, this clear path, a source of unmistakable light. So when we talk about it being the foundation of happiness, what does that actually mean for someone who's trying to understand its impact?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when the Quran is described as the foundation of happiness, it's really suggesting that the principles, and the guidance that's found within it, that these are the things that can actually lead to a fulfilling and meaningful life.
Okay.
Think about it this way. If the Quran provides a framework for how to live justly, how to live with compassion, how to have a sense of purpose, then if you align your life with these principles, it would naturally contribute to a state of inner peace and contentment.
Right.
Which is, at the heart of happiness. And that analogy of its grace mirroring Allah's grace on creation, it really elevates it to this exceptional level. It suggests that it's a unique and invaluable gift.
Yeah, and to really bring this to life, there's this really interesting story about a British singer who set out to actually critique the Quran.
Really?
But instead of, finding flaws or things to criticize, he was so moved by what he encountered that he embraced Islam. He felt compelled to destroy all of his previous work. That's a pretty powerful example of the transformative power of the Quran.
It is. It really emphasizes the idea that engaging with the Quran can have these profound and really unexpected consequences on someone's life.
Right.
On their beliefs. It wasn't just, an intellectual exercise for him. It was deeply personal and transformative.
And this idea of it being transformative, it's not just about individual change. There's this saying attributed to the Prophet Muhammad that says that the best among us are the ones who not only learn the Quran, but teach it.
Absolutely.
So this elevates that act of not just understanding it ourselves, but actively sharing that knowledge with other people.
It highlights the dynamic nature of actually engaging with the Quran. The learning provides that individual with understanding and guidance.
Right.
And then the teaching allows that wisdom to spread to benefit a wider community.
And it's not meant to be confined to just individuals.
Exactly.
It's meant to be shared and implemented in society.
And if you think about the bigger picture, there's the concept of, the great jihad.
Right.
Which is this dedicated effort to spread, explain, and encourage the implementation of the Quran. It shows how important that active engagement, dissemination of its message is considered. It's a call to really strive intellectually and spiritually for its understanding and application.
Now, one of the things that really jumped out at me is this idea that the Quran is free from any kind of flaw, and it's timeless. And we're told that unlike books written by humans, which can be, become outdated
Right.
or contain inaccuracies over time. As our knowledge expands, the Quran remains consistent. And what's really interesting is that even with all of the incredible scientific advancements over the past 14 centuries, we're told that no definitive scientific fact has ever actually contradicted anything in the Quran. That's a pretty big statement.
Yeah. A key aspect of this is the way certain verses are actually interpreted.
Okay.
For example, there's the idea of horses, mules, asses being created for riding, which was the primary mode of transport at the time.
Right.
But then the verse continues, and it says that Allah creates what you do not know. Now, this is often understood to encompass all the forms of transportation that have emerged since then. Cars, airplanes, all of these things.
Yeah.
So it's suggesting this divine foresight that isn't limited to just that immediate understanding of the time.
That's really interesting. And there's also the example of the pilgrimage.
Yes.
And the description of people journeying from every deep, distant
and faraway place. And the word deep being connected to the spherical nature of the earth, which is really, really interesting because distance becomes increasingly dimensional on a sphere. It's a really thought-provoking connection.
It is. The interpretation suggests that deep in this context, it doesn't just refer to geographical distance.
Right.
It actually alludes to the curvature of the earth. Because as the earth is a sphere, traveling long distances means traversing this curvature, right? So it creates a sense of depth and dimension to the journey.
Yeah.
So the use of deep is seen as hinting at this spherical nature.
Wow.
Even though scientific understanding at the time was different. It encourages us to think about the multifaceted nature of the language being used. What stands out to you when you hear interpretations like this?
Well,
and that connect this ancient text with these modern scientific understandings?
Yeah, it really makes you pause, and think about the potential layers of meaning within the text.
So let's talk about another crucial difference between the Quran and earlier divine books. We're told that while previous scriptures were entrusted to people for preservation, and as a result were believed to have been, altered or even lost, Allah has taken on the responsibility of safeguarding the Quran.
Yes. That's a really fundamental distinction.
Yeah, so what are the implications of this divine guarantee?
Well, the implications are huge. I mean, the verse in Surah Al-Hijr actually states that, indeed it is we who sent down the Quran, and indeed we will be its guardian. So this means that the Quran, in its original Arabic, has been protected from any intentional corruption or alteration. This is about the physical existence of the text, but it's also about the integrity of its letters, its grammar, the order of its verses.
It's interesting that this point is made about these, these false verses sometimes appearing online.
Right.
But there's a reassurance that their inauthenticity is pretty clear, even to those who just have a basic understanding of the Quran.
Yeah.
And this idea that the Quran is dominant over all previous heavenly books, it really reinforces its status as the final, comprehensive divine message.
Exactly. And if you connect that to the bigger picture, the Quran's referred to as the gatherer of all the divine rules from the beginning of time until the day of resurrection.
Wow.
And it's meant for all of humanity, not just one nation or group.
Right.
So this really underscores that universal scope and finality. And then, going even further, the divine preservation of the Quran also inherently ensures the preservation of the Prophet's Sunnah, his practices and sayings, because the Sunnah actually provides the context, the practical explanation for understanding the Quran. They are completely linked.
This brings us to this idea of the miraculous nature of the Quran, and this is presented as a key reason for believing in its divine origin. The assertion's pretty direct. It says that humanity just cannot produce a single verse that matches the Quran in terms of its eloquence, its wisdom, its impact. And then we get these three categories of miracles. So let's start with informatory miracles. What are we talking about here?
So these refer to the Quran's ability to accurately recount past events, sometimes with details that weren't actually known at the time of revelation. For instance, the Quran refers to the ruler during the time of Prophet Yusuf in Egypt as king, but it uses Pharaoh for the ruler during the time of Prophet Musa.
Right.
Now, historical research supports the accuracy of those titles for those specific periods.
Wow.
Additionally, there's information about contemporary events that happened during the Prophet's lifetime and prophecies about future events.
Like what?
Well, like the prediction of the Roman Empire being defeated and then subsequently achieving victory over the Persians within just a few years. And it even says that this would happen in the lowest point on Earth, which is understood to be the Palestinian Valley.
So we have specific historical details and future predictions. That's really, really fascinating.
And then we get to the scientific miracles,
Yeah.
which is where verses in the Quran are seen to align with scientific discoveries that were made centuries later.
So what are some examples of that?
Oh, there are many. One is the description of each element consisting of atoms that orbit a nucleus.
Right.
Now, this is seen as hinted at in verses like, Surah Yasin, verse 40, which speaks of celestial bodies, each moving in an orbit. Another example is the Quran statement in Surah Al-Najm, verses 45 and 46, that it is the male sperm that determines the baby's gender.
Wow.
A fact that was only scientifically understood much, much later.
Yeah.
Though we have other examples like the Earth's rotation, the apparent movement of mountains. That's in Surah An-Naml, verse 88. The sun running its course, Surah Yasin, verse 38. The feeling of constrictedness that people experience when they resist spiritual knowledge is likened to the sensation of going up to high altitudes.
Interesting.
That's in Surah Al-An'am, verse 125. The way clouds look from above, they look like land features. And the Quran describes the sky as returning water vapor and reflecting waves. That's Surah At-Tariq, verse 11. It's this wide range of phenomena.
Yeah.
I mean, what stands out to you when you hear these connections?
It's just this idea that there are potentially these really deep connections between the text and the natural world. And finally, we have these rhetorical miracles, which focus on the unique and powerful way that language is used in the Quran. What makes the rhetoric of the Quran so distinctive?
Well, these miracles, they emphasize the eloquence, the precision, the impact of the language in conveying meaning. Even these small linguistic choices are seen as carrying profound significance. For instance, in Surah Hud, verse 6, it talks about Allah providing sustenance for every creature. But the inclusion of the word from is interpreted as signifying this vast and inexhaustible nature of Allah's provision. And similarly, the placement of the phrase, it is, we worship and we asked for help. In Surah Fatiha, verse 5. This is seen as a powerful and concise way of emphasizing the exclusivity of worship to Allah.
So it's this idea of using the language in a very specific way to get a point across.
Exactly.
So beyond these inherent qualities, this deep dive also discusses how Allah provides evidence for the truth of the Quran through events that actually happen in the world.
Yes.
Through the fulfillment of its promises and warning.
Right.
And this is referred to as exegesis. Can you give us some examples of that?
Sure. One example is the Quran's warning against usury, interest-based transactions, and the promise that Allah will actually eradicate wealth gained through it, while He will bless and increase wealth acquired through charity. Now, the historical and economic consequences associated with usury, these are seen as a real-world manifestation of this principle. Similarly, the Quran speaks about, a good life for believers. And that's interpreted as a form of divine testimony. And the experience of, increased blessings and sustenance after giving charity, that's another example. Furthermore, the idea of a balance of power in the world being a blessing from Allah is mentioned in Surah Al-Hajj, verse 40. And the negative consequences that can arise when this balance is disrupted, that's also seen as a form of divine attestation. It encourages us to look at those broader patterns and consequences in the world around us.
So if we bring all of this together, the Quran is described as the word of Allah, this unbreakable connection to us, this clear and direct path to follow the protocol for all of existence. And understanding and living by it is presented as the greatest blessing, second only to the gift of life itself. And this connection that's made between the creation of the universe and the revelation of the Quran is really striking. What's the significance of putting these two together?
Well, it emphasizes the importance of both. It suggests that just as the universe was created with purpose and order, so too is the Quran revealed as a guide for humanity. The contrast with the worship of created things, animals, like in some cultures, it further highlights the Quran's call to worship the Creator, find meaning and purpose through his guidance. Without this divine guidance, human existence is lacking that essential framework.
And while this guidance is presented as so crucial, the deep dive really stresses that Allah calls us to believe voluntarily, not through force. This idea of voluntary faith seems so important. How does that fit into the overall message?
Well, the principle of voluntary belief, as stated in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 256, there shall be no compulsion in religion.
Right.
This underscores that faith is a matter of the heart, of conviction. It's not about coercion. This aligns with the Quran's appeal to reason and reflection.
Okay.
The sheer magnitude of the universe, illustrated by the oath concerning the location of the stars in Surah Al-Waqi'ah, verses 75 and 76.
Right.
This is then linked to the distinguished nature of the Quran in verse 77.
Interesting.
So it's like saying a book of such profound wisdom and guidance is fitting for this immense universe. And then there's this powerful reassurance that the fulfillment of Allah's promises to believers is more certain than the continuation of the universe itself.
Wow.
It highlights the truthfulness of the divine word. And then conversely, there's a warning against neglecting worship and being led astray by our desires.
Right.
In Surah Maryam, verse 59, ultimately, the Quran is this comprehensive guide. It's a constitution for life.
Yeah.
It's a source of light. It's a straight path that leads to prosperity and honor.
And this idea that those who are deeply knowledgeable in the Quran, they carry that well-being with them beyond this life, that's such a profound thought. It really encourages us to invest in this knowledge.
It does.
And this absolute central theme, the one that keeps coming up over and over again, is the oneness of Allah, monotheism. And it mentions that some people are surprised that divine knowledge would be revealed to a human being.
Right.
What is the core message of the Quran regarding who we should worship?
The core message is the absolute oneness of Allah.
Okay.
And the imperative to worship none but him. Verses like Surah Hud, verses 1 and 2, Surah Al-Kahf, verse 110, Surah Al-Anbiya, verse 25. They all emphasize this fundamental principle.
Right.
And this message of monotheism isn't new.
Okay.
It's the consistent call of all the prophets throughout history.
Yeah.
It's the foundation upon which everything else rests.
And to help us understand and connect with these principles, the Quran contains so many stories described as, the best of stories, offering guidance, examples for all sorts of human experiences. Can you share a few examples of the wisdom that we can glean from these narratives?
Absolutely. We have Prophet Yusuf's resistance to temptation, which offers profound insights into maintaining integrity in difficult situations. Prophet Musa's steadfastness in standing up for the truth against tyranny, an example of courage and conviction.
Wow.
We have the poignant story of Prophet Nuh and his son, highlighting the importance of faith even over family when those things clash. The narrative of Prophet Ibrahim's break from his father's idolatry emphasizes the priority of the truth. Then we have contrasting examples like the wives of Prophets Nuh and Lut, who strayed from the path, versus the unwavering faith of Pharaoh's wife, Asia, despite her husband's oppression. And then the Quran also presents stories of those in power, like Toa Karnin, those who longed for children, like Prophet Zechariah, and those who were unjustly imprisoned, like Prophet Yusuf. So it shows that the guidance is relevant across all walks of life. The assertion is that every story in the Quran holds a remedy for different facets of the human condition.
It's like this vast reservoir of wisdom drawn from real human experiences. Finally, this deep dive touches on the Quran's inherent ability to build faith just through the act of reading it. The example given is the verse about Allah raising the heavens without any visible pillars. So how does that kind of verse inspire innate belief?
Verses like that, like Surah Arad, verse 2, it speaks of Allah raising the heavens without any visible pillars. It evokes a sense of awe, that the power of the Creator. It challenges our everyday perception, hints at a reality beyond what we immediately comprehend. Naturally, it leads to that feeling of recognizing a higher power. The Quran is described as a book of enlightenment, guiding people out of that darkness of ignorance and doubt into the light of truth. That's mentioned in Surah Ibrahim, verse 1. And this powerful image of the disbeliever being in layers of darkness while the believer is bathed in Allah's light. It really encapsulates that transformative power of the text and the ultimate standard of morality. It's presented as embodying the manners of the Quran, reflecting that the prophet's character was the Quran itself.
Wow.
So living by these principles is the path to fulfillment in this life and the next. Moving from the shadows to the light, to knowledge, to profound understanding.
So today we've really, taken a deep dive into the Quran. And we've seen that it's understood to be this unique and divinely preserved book, a source of knowledge, guidance, miracles, all rooted in that central message of monotheism.
Absolutely.
It really does stand apart from all other texts. And it offers this timeless wisdom that speaks to every aspect of human existence.
As you consider everything we've explored today about the significance and the nature of the Quran, we encourage you to think about its immense value and the impact it could have on your own understanding and life. We really invite you to delve deeper into these teachings yourself.
And join us next time for another deep dive. We're going to continue our exploration of Surah Al-Baqarah.
We are.
Specifically focusing on the qualities of those who are guided by the Quran, beginning with the second verse.
Looking forward to it.
See you then.
See ya.